surprise, it's Sunday morning. I don't usually do live interviews, but I didn't want to wait to interview this person. His name is Jock Brocas. You are going to love his accent. He's got several things that he does. I met him under the legal label, but he's actually also a spiritual medium and areas, and he's an expert on grief. And when we met like a week ago, let me get you on here, Jack. Blown away, and I said we need to schedule like 3 interviews, and one of them as soon as possible. So hopefully, Jock, you can get on here. There you go. Okay, it worked. Yeah,
It
I was just,
worked.
yes. I was saying, you and I, we just met, what, like a week ago or a
That's
week and a
right.
half?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I was like, we gotta get you on here.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is, and as you said, this is my first kind of podcast interview on an Instagram, on the Instagram platform. So this is I am, as you said, an Instagram virgin.
You're an Instagram virgin,
It's first
live
one.
virgin.
I can't believe I actually you managed to get, because I always swore I would never do anything live, but this is the first for me.
Good, good. Well, I'm so happy to see your face and hear that gorgeous accent. Oh my gosh, I told you the Scottish accent. Even though you're not in Scotland, you're in America right now.
That's right. Yes, I'm in North Carolina.
Yeah, same time zone. So there's many things that you're an expert in. This was certainly not one of them that we either of us expected when we first met,
No.
but there's so much overlap with the people that you and I help, and so I had to
Yeah.
get you on here to talk about grief. And I thought that today, as we are in what's called the Bermuda Triangle for many parents whose kids have been turned against them, meaning the holidays of Thanksgiving,
Oh
Christmas, and
God.
New Year's are the hardest time of the year for so many
Mm.
parents, that we could talk about the unique grief of a parent who's experienced a child who's been turned against them or taken from them emotionally. And so I was gonna say, before you introduce yourself and all of the
Yeah.
things that you do, when knowing that kind of grief, like the grief when a child is still out there, how do you think that kind of grief differs from, say, some other loss like death or divorce, like where the person's still there?
Well, see, I like to say, there's a golden thread that runs through every element of grief. And I'm so glad that you're kind of talking about a different, I would say, expression of grief, because people connect the word grief with death and dying. And it becomes a very fearful subject to tackle. But loss is loss, and we lose um not only loved ones, but we lose a lot of different aspects in our life. And losing a child, everything is born out of disconnection. Any kind of grief is disconnection. And so, if you're losing the connection with a child, or a child is being taken away, or even if the child's older and decides that, they're no longer having any connection with the family, that is a really serious aspect of grief. That is an expression of grief that can cause all elements, can cause psychosis, can cause, mental illness, breakdowns. It's really something, and especially at this time of year, we often think about losing loved ones, but we never think about just this aspect of disconnection, and
Mhm.
how when we are disconnected, everything changes, dynamics change, our whole belief systems change. We start to question life, we start to question our role, even as parents. I'm not a parent, so if anybody's listening out there, I'm not a parent. I'm a parent to bonsai trees and plants in my office, and that's it. That's it. But I do understand, because over the years I've had everything from people who are lost loved ones, who have lost loved ones in the battlefield, to people that have just lost relationships and other signs of loss and disconnected. And actually, what we're talking about today, I've had a lot of experience of parents and separated parents that have disconnected from their child and don't have relationships with their children. And that can either be through divorce, it can also be through illness, and it can be through many other different things. It could be through drugs, it could be through any kind of substance abuse or any other elements of abuse. So this is a fascinating subject to talk about.
Yeah. So speaking of that, tell us about your background.
Well, I am, as you know, a spiritual medium, which we didn't know about before. I'm involved in. I'm ex-military as well, so I have a military background. When I was very young, uh, I even at one point decided to train for the priesthood. I spent most of my young life in a monastery. My uncle was a monk. I spent a lot of time in that monastery. Every holiday, every time I could get, I went on religious retreats ever since I was very young. So I had a great deal of experience in spiritual development, and then later on in life, you kind of try to find your way, and it's almost like you're trying to put the square into the round hole, and you're trying to put the triangle into the square hole, and you never really fit anywhere.
Hmm.
And I met my beautiful wife, and she became one of the greatest teachers I ever have, and still have. And my experiences from when I was young, spiritual experiences, start to make sense, and I started to take the round ball and put it into the round hole, and the square into the square, and everything fit. And so I've been I want to say professional medium for over 2 decades, over 25 years. So I have a lot of experience in the field, but I'm also a psychologist, so a psychologist researcher. I'm just finishing a master's in transformational psychology, going on to doing a PhD, and I work in a lot of the research in grief. I've done a lot of work in all avenues of grief, and I've spoken about it as an expert in many different mediums. I've written a number of books as well that have been published internationally, like yourself. Had you know got out and wrote, and these. But I must admit, though, I had delusions of grandeur when I wrote my first book. I wrote my first book, and Powers of the Sixth Sense, and I thought, that's it. I'm going to make millions from this. I'm going to go to America. I'm going to sit by the sea. My wife and I are going to a lovely cottage, and we're just going to write and teach.
Hmm.
Boy, was I wrong. So,
Hey, but you're in
I,
America
I mean, and
on the
this is the
coast.
thing. Yeah, I'm in America, and I love how the Americans are very forthcoming and supportive of everything that you do. So anybody else who knows me out there or doesn't know me, I'm also the founding chief editor of Paranormal Daily News, which is one of the top paranormal magazines in the world. But it doesn't come from a sensational point of view. We come from a very grounded, very academic. We distill the academic into the layperson's understanding to understand mystical experiences. So I do a little bit, and I consult in the legal industry. I have a background from the military side that helps me within the legal industry, and that's how we met.
I know, which is crazy. We just did our interview about legal stuff last week.
I know that's coming out very soon, actually.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
nobody knows in my channel here in this that I do anything like that. So I keep everything kind of separate.
Well, now you're on the big
Now,
screen.
they know.
Now they know. Secrets out. All right. So one thing that you said when we had our first meeting, which really surprised me, we talked about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's stages
Mhm.
of grief. And you said
Yeah,
that you don't really agree with that. Tell us why not?
there's no stages of grief, and people misunderstand. Kubler-Ross was fascinating. She was a great researcher. But her work was primarily around anticipatory grief, people who were knowing that they were dying, and she was able to watch them. And her research actually, and I have to go back into I've written articles actually on this, but her research came from someone else
Really?
that predominantly talked about these stages beforehand, and she was identifying stages as people were leading up to the dying as because they knew they were going to die. And then for some reason, we decided that this was the stages of grief, and this was every other stage that happened with grief. But the reality is that we can go through every single one of those stages in moments. minutes,
Hmm.
an hour. You know, you can feel detached, you can bargain, all of those stages. You can be angry, and then you can have acceptance, and then you can. So everything, you know, it's not compartmentalized. Everything you can feel it. You can feel all these emotions one after the other.
Hmm.
One thing can trigger you, and you can go through that whole thing. So to say that there's these stages of grief that are a linear form, that's actually a bit of a misunderstanding. People kind of get that wrong. And I've seen so many, social media posts and so many articles, or even people asking questions, what stage of grief is this? What stage of grief am I in? And we all also have to remember that everybody expresses grief in their own way. And we can't label someone and say they're at that stage or they're doing this. And the biggest thing is we are terrified of communicating anybody who's grieving. And that's just from the death and dying point of view. And when we start to look at it, that all of these so-called stages exist in every aspect of life, every aspect of grief in our life.
Yeah, I mean, I'm really glad you said that too, because our clients who are dealing with crazy divorces, separations, custody battles, but
Yeah,
thereafter, the co-parenting that lasts for years, they will often, there's moments where everything gets hyped up. It's often like that for a while, and then it settles, and then it goes
yeah,
back again. And they
yeah.
keep saying, why, when it's 8 years later, am I still feeling this? I shouldn't be.
Because they are not aware that they're grieving. That's a simple answer. Because if they're answered the question, why am I going through this? Why am I feeling this way? Is because we always try to put a label on something. And to help label something helps to give us some kind of understanding. But the label of grief is, in my mind, is wrong, because we take it and we label it for death and dying. And so people won't connect that. They won't say that I'm grieving. They'll say, well, no, I haven't lost anybody. I met someone a long time ago who said, it's definitely not grief, Jock, right? It's not grief because I don't have anybody on the other side. I've not lost anybody.
Hmm.
And then when I sat and I explained it and I said, read this and sent these things, he came back and he said, I'm going to try and not swear, but holy shit, you were right. This is what I'm feeling. I'm grieving.
Yeah.
And when he came to that understanding, that awareness, he was then able to start to look at integrating it, and becoming aware of it allowed him to face it head on, to
Mhm.
understand it, and it to become more of a teacher to him rather than something that he would suffer from. And it takes a while. And here's the other thing I wanted. This is going to be controversial, but
So let's hear it. And you're allowed to swear too.
all right, okay. So yeah, even though I'm spiritual, yeah, sometimes I do. I'm still a soldier. Sometimes I do cuss. But so here's the thing: when people are grieving, they they think that there's only them, and people don't understand how to cope with someone who's grieving. And
Mhm.
we tend to then, because we're terrified to communicate with them. And what I want anybody out here to understand, and this is the controversial thing, people are not going to like me for it. You're never going to heal through grief. You can't heal it, because every, our life is about grief. We are born to die. There's a time to live, or there's a time to die. But that shouldn't be scary, because what it is we have to learn to integrate grief. Grief becomes a part of us, because if we actually look at what grief really is, this emotion, this feeling, this journey that I like to kind of visualize it, teach people to visualize it as a journey. It's not something we will heal from. Because if we're looking for healing, we're looking to reverse a disease. If you look at Merriam-Webster's dictionary or anything else, or we look at how things change, our ontology changes with every experience that we have. If we go into an ontological shock, or an experience changes our belief in any way, or challenges us, everything can change. And so in grief, we're not going to heal it, because it's not a disease. and it's not an addiction. And that's the problem. People try to heal something because they think we heal a disease, or we try to reverse an addiction or heal an addiction, and that means it doesn't exist anymore. Well, is that true? Not really, because it's still there, and diseases can come back. And when you say you're healing a disease, that means that there is no pathology, there is nothing there, there's no pathogen, there's nothing that's going to, spark that disease again, right? So this is why I'm saying you can't heal it, because I lost my father when I was very young. I still grieve to this day. I can get triggered, but I've learned to integrate it, and that trigger doesn't trigger me in a bad way anymore, because I've managed to reverse that. I've managed to transform the trigger from something negative into something positive. And that's one of the things that perhaps your clients need to look at. The transformation is transformation of the trigger into
Mm.
something positive,
Yeah,
right? Which
you got a
makes a
question.
massive difference.
Yeah, you got a question that is a big one and that we're going to get into more specifically. It's like, how do you live with grief? How do you accept it in a practical way? I'm thinking probably
Wow.
books have been written on that one.
Grief is part of your life. Grief is an experience that can be, and I've said this, you and I've talked. Grief is it can be either your greatest teacher or your greatest nemesis. It's
Hmm.
up to you. The thing is, whatever you believe in, God, Buddha, whatever your path is, the fact is that we believe in a higher power. Whether we turn to that higher power has given us an amazing gift, and that's the gift of choice. That gift of choice you can use in a positive or a negative way. Now, grief can be your greatest teacher or your greatest nemesis. It's up to you. Once we become aware of it and we understand that grief is a power that can help transform us, but that we grieve, it sounds really funny. We grieve every day. We don't realize it,
Hmm.
right?
That makes me think like we negotiate every day, and I guess we grieve every day.
Of course we do, because it might be, I lost that job, I lost that contract, I just lost $10, or any type of loss is going to make you think, and it's a lesser expression of grief, because grief is just about losing anyway. So
Hmm.
losing a child, or being disconnected, which is terrible, have been disconnected from that child is a massive expression, different expressions of grief, and that's what I want people to get into. There's not one expression. It is not about death and dying. And people might say, "Well, yeah, you're disconnected, or you go through a divorce. It is kind of a death of something and the beginning of something." I kind of get that. I get what you're saying, or what people will say. But the reality is that grief exists every moment of the day.
Hmm.
And when you start to realize that loss exists in us, we could be watching a news channel and we find someone who's dead. Or, for instance, we went through Hurricane Helene here. I witnessed people grieving not through death, but through loss of a photograph,
Hmm.
right?
Yeah.
Think about the LA fires. I was asked, I think it was Vogue magazine had asked me to comment on the LA fires, and that was one of the things I said. Grief is triggered by the loss of some heirloom. So imagine the amount of loss that you might go through on a daily basis, even losing an argument in law, right? Think about a lawyer who loses an argument. They go through a grieving process. They just don't know it, because everybody's terrified of the word grief. So I always say, name it and reframe it. Name
Hmm.
it and reframe it. So then you can start to deal with it and realize it's part of my life. And when I
Yeah.
become aware of it and accept it, then I've been given a gift of choice to change it and transform it.
Yeah. I mean, this is so similar to changing perspective with our clients too, who are dealing with the worst situations, feel like it's this life sentence. It's not, but it's hard. And it's acceptance is a big part of it. Let's talk about ambiguous loss. What is ambiguous loss?
I
And
think
especially in terms of the alienation concept.
I think that comes down to lack of understanding. when you can't label it or you don't understand it, ambiguous loss. Let's say, for instance, we all went through COVID, right? So we would find that loss in the loss of a relationship and the loss of a child through a divorce, through anything else. But think about it just as an easy thing. When you can't understand something, so here's something that happened in COVID. Anybody who's kind of biblical, let me take you back to the Old Testament and we'll talk about the Passover when this unknown force came over that nobody could understand and took the firstborn. Whether it doesn't matter what religion you are, this is just an example.
Hmm.
So we had an unknown force that was released into the world that took lives of people, and that's an element of ambiguous love because we don't understand it. How did this happen? We can't label it. What is this?
Hmm.
Right? So someone who's alienated in a relationship, lack of understanding. They don't, it doesn't fit in their
Right.
life. This is not the way it was meant to be. So now we feel alienated, and that is a deep sense of loss. And that is then another expression of grief. Alienation is another expression of grief.
Yeah. How do you see, I mean, you mentioned it quickly at the beginning, people who have gone through something like this, how does it affect their sense of self-worth or their identity, like short term and long term?
Well, the worst thing is for anybody to feel like they failed,
Hmm.
right? And so when they go through maybe something in this relationship where they're alienated, so let's say a child is alienated from the mother or the father through what's happened, you question yourself, or you question yourself. You feel a failure. You feel like I wasn't able to do this, even if consciously you'll say, "No, I don't agree with that," but subconsciously
Hmm.
that's what's going on. And the minute that you admit that you're actually attacking yourself, and also the other thing is that we don't understand the power of forgiveness because then in an alienation potential in this kind of battle that's going on and you feel alienated, you're looking for forgiveness and you're trying to find a way through it. And everybody would tell you that, well, you need to forgive yourself and you need to forgive that other person. But the reality is what causes the suffering, Lisa, is
Hmm.
judgment,
Yeah.
because it's the judgment that creates your suffering inside. In forgiveness, you don't need to forgive anyone and you don't need to forgive yourself and they don't need to forgive you. That's an illusion. What you need to forgive is the judgment, because how we judge something is what creates the prison of the self. And you put yourself in this prison and it's dark and you can see the moon through the little hole in the window and you're longing to get out there. You feel alienated and you feel separated, disconnected. And if only you realized that you put yourself there because you were looking externally for forgiveness or you were looking externally for something else, you didn't realize that the door was open all along and all you had to do was walk out and go into the moonlight because you created the prison yourself. So even when we alienate, when we feel alienated, I would say the first step is awareness of the judgment and then work on releasing the judgment, not
Hmm.
forgiving it, releasing it. Surrender the judgment. Remember that you're a powerful spiritual being. You're a spiritual being having a human experience. You're not a human having a spiritual experience. That's
Interesting.
very strong,
Yeah.
right? And to become aware of that means that you are calling on something that is higher than yourself. Remember that the animating, we only exist because there's a spiritual force that animates all of life. The same force that animates you and I, animates that bush out there, animates the tree, animates the hummingbird. It's the same force that animates all of life. We come from that force. We only exist because that force has given us life. And when you realize that you're not separate from it, that you're a part of it, you can start to become more aware of these things that are causing you your suffering. And then you can start to let it go. And when you're in a custody battle, or you're in going through a divorce and you've lost connection with your children, realize that your children is you, you are your children, you are your spouse, your everything is connected. And when you realize that, that gives you a really good internal power, a place to come from to look at transformation, not healing, transformation.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just thinking like so much of this is self-compassion and
Absolutely.
and how do you even like okay, I'm gonna have a different question because this is, I mean, you're blowing my mind and I'm just like I can't wait to share this with people who are not watching it right now. I cannot wait. But if someone is grieving the loss of the
Hmm.
relationship specifically with the child
Yeah.
and they feel hopeful, how can they balance, because that's a common thing, is like holding on to hope, and hope can destroy us sometimes. How
Yeah.
can someone balance hope and grief in a situation like this?
That's a good question because I don't see it as two separate things,
Okay.
right? Because again, it's hope is something that gives us is an emotion or something we look towards that maybe gives us light at the end of the tunnel. I
Hmm.
can there's a potential there. And sometimes when people will say, well, we lose hope, we lose all sense of hope and everything else. I would try to say to people, don't look towards hope. Live in the present moment because if you look towards hope, you're placing all your power on that thing that you think is going to happen. You're placing it, and then what happens if that hope is taken away? And here's the other thing I talked about this golden thread. One expression of grief can be a domino effect. How it falls can go on to another expression of grief. So imagine if you're hopeful for something and the law changes or something changes in the dynamic, and then that's taken away from you. Boom,
Hmm.
there's another expression of grief.
Yeah.
So I say to people, don't look toward hope. Always look toward transformation. How can I transform the way I think about this? How can I see? I always believe that the brain is an expression of the mind, right? Everybody thinks everything comes from a brain, and the I'll send you an article with something I wrote against my very first rebuttal I ever wrote against this researcher that said that soul didn't exist and there's just the brain was everything. But the reality is that the brain is an expression of the mind. The mind is the psychological building blocks of reality. So we have a real power within us. And so if we start to label something like hope and it gets taken away, that can be negative. So I try not to live in that spiral. I try not to live in that hope idea of hope. I'm just looking at transforming something for a permanent transformation. So if someone's looking in their relationship now and they're maybe going through this legal battle and they've lost connection, what can they transform in their life that will draw them closer? What vibrationally can they change? Even the power of prayer. Don't lose hope because hope's an illusion. You want to be able to learn to trust in yourself and the power that you have and start to look towards transformation. Because if I cling on to hope, then and it's taken away, that makes it worse. So I don't really want to cling. I just want to know. I want to stop believing. I want to come to knowing. If we believe in something, we're going to believe in another person's perceptions or expectation because our beliefs change like that.
Hmm.
Let's I mean, just look, I'm not going into politics, but politics is crazy in the States, right?
Yeah.
But I've seen so many people that believe in one side, something happens, and then they believe in another side.
Yeah.
Then let's look at the teenager who's now maybe you're disconnected. There's a battle going on. That teenager believes in one thing, then they're influenced or coached, and their belief changes. And that belief then can change to a positive or a negative. I want to get to the point of not believing because if I'm believing, then I'm giving the power to somebody else's expectations and somebody's perceptions. I want to get to the point of knowing. Because if I know something is divine, as part of that, there is no gray area, there is no question. So I want to know that I can transform. Once you know that, the universe starts to act in that way and start to bring that transformation towards you, help you to face things that may have an imbalance in your life that you can change. Maybe it's the way that you communicate. Maybe even the simple way that you communicate changes and then changes the dynamics of the case or changes the dynamics of the relationship. Even if it's a negative relationship that is split up, there's always a way of finding balance. Because if there was no balance in life, we wouldn't exist because Mother Nature wouldn't be able to balance anything. The weather is all about balance. And when it's imbalanced, things change. We get bad weather. We have to continually keep balancing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right. So let's talk about some practical ideas. So all of this is amazing, but I'm thinking our audience is like, okay, I want to transform.
Right.
I want to learn that balance. But what do I do right now? Like today, are there any like little steps that someone can do to start moving towards this bigger transformation
Yeah.
goal? We talked about communication. That's something
Yeah.
Chris and I do all the time. I feel like
Communicate.
learning to communicate differently is tremendous in terms of shifting a power dynamic, standing up to bullies, like really changing your life. So I am completely on the same
Yeah.
page. But what else are things like that you work with people who are dealing with grief over whatever it is that they're like, this is how I start, like this is what I can do?
Well, here's one of the things you can do is you can change your self-perception. You can change your perception. And that may be as simple as because I mean there's loads of things we could say, journal, meditate,
Yeah.
that's out there. That's YouTube. You can that's all there. But what about starting to look at the world differently? What about instead of actually, let's example, you're standing in front of a tree and you just see a tree.
Hmm.
Well, what if I see its life? What if I start to, we're built for storytelling. I think you and I spoke about this a little
Yeah.
bit, right? So we talk about storytelling. What about if we started to tell our own stories? What if we went into the story? What if we look at that tree and we don't just see a tree, but we see life? Where did it come from? The seed. Where did the seed come from? If we go into the story, we start to see things differently. We start to perceive things differently. That's us starting to, an element of transformation because we're starting to look at the world differently.
Hmm. Like
And then the
going
other,
deeper, going
going
deeper,
deeper,
like
go deeper,
pausing,
pause,
reflecting, going deeper, and not necessarily about your life right now.
go into the story. And this is a good segue because what I was going to say next is when we put ourselves and when not we're not projecting ourselves, but when we put ourselves in, we've had that walk a mile in somebody else's shoes.
Hmm.
In communication, what I want to do is say, how would I be if I was in that position? How am I going to react? Would I react in that same way? If we try to understand the person from their point of view, then we start to open ourselves up to more awareness. Not just ourselves, but we start to understand that individual. We start to try and understand from their point of view. And that can be a simple thing is even training yourself to you go into Starbucks and instead of thinking about my coffee or my what I'm doing, everything else is like, wonder what that person, how would I be if I was working behind the counter? And maybe how how would I communicate in that way? So you begin to have an empathy to other people as well, and that helps you to get more of an understanding. But I would say the biggest thing for anybody is to become aware of their own power and their own self, and to start looking at the world differently. To start to realize that you are the world and the world is you, and it's up to you how you see it and perceive it.
Yeah. You know, as you're saying that, I'm thinking of a situation right now that happens often where a child has cut off a parent who they were super close to, and the parent is our client saying, at what point is it okay for me to be really angry at this kid? Like, I raised this kid and I were really, really close, and for the past year or so, they haven't even talked to me. It's like my ex stole them, and I'm really mad because every single time I reach out, they completely
Yeah.
ignore me. I've tried to explain that the child is a hostage, that it's not they're projecting what they would do in that situation as if it's logical, and it's not logical.
I think it's also to understand that all things are temporary. And I trained in martial arts for many, many years. You can see my one of my things in the background here.
Hmm.
I trained in traditional Japanese Budo, and our grandmaster used to say that hurdles exist in your life. Hurdles are merely temporary things that you have to get over, and if you can't get over them, you go around them
Hmm.
because it's how you perceive it, it's how you see it, right? So, and it's good that you're bringing this up because we have a situation like that in our family at the moment. We've had one of our family members has now disowned just over Christmas. Their
Hmm.
mother and father are not allowed to see the new baby that just got born, and
Yeah.
so there's this disconnection. But I'm going to treat this the same way as I'll treat any grief. The minute you're fearful of your emotions you've lost, if you're angry, be angry. Allow yourself to express it because if you can't express it, right, you're just going to hold it in. What happens if we take a bottle of Pepsi or Coke and it eventually just explodes, right?
Hmm.
You've got to allow yourself to express the grief. So if you're angry, be angry because it's only temporary. There will come a point as you're starting to work on yourself and you're starting to um, see the situation differently, you'll start to react differently. But that
Hmm.
only happens when you allow yourself to express. Now, last year, um, and it says death. We lost, as I told you, we lost a lot of family
Yeah.
members, one after the other, one after the other. Right? And then my mother at the moment in Scotland now is ill with COVID, and she's older, so that's really worried because my brother's doing amazing. He's been there and looking after her, but she couldn't get a bed in the hospital. She's at home convalescing, and there's an element of me grieving there, right? So, but you have to express it, and so when last year when we were separated from Christmas last year. My wife was in the UK, I was here. We were totally separated. We'd lost our mother, and I was in a coffee shop. Someone asked me, how's things going? We miss seeing your mum. When's she coming back over? And then I was like, boom, and I just let it go.
Hmm.
Most people fight that. Most people fight to keep that back, and they think they can't be angry, they can't express. And in your case with your client, there's an element of them where they think I can't do this. I know I shouldn't be angry, so they
But
fight against
she can't.
themselves.
So just to clarify too, and somebody said this, but she can't express anger to this child, though.
But she can express it in another way. She doesn't need to express it to the child, right?
Hmm.
Because that can cause even more disconnection. But she can express it in a different way to release it.
Yeah.
It's important that you allow your emotions to be expressed, but you've got to have discernment on how you express them, right?
Hmm.
So you're not going to express it in front of the child because you know that that's going to be detrimental. But can I express that anger in another way? Yes, right? It could be that she goes out and she walks like she's on fire and
Yeah.
she's talking to her and she's out loud or whatever else. It could be that she goes to the gym, or it could be she goes on and connects with someone else that she can express and can vent with.
Right.
Because once that's gone and surrendered, then you can step back and you can start to see the forest and not just the tree. You
Hmm.
can start to see it from okay, and then you can say, okay, I am the child. Remember, I said we're all interconnected. We only exist because the same animating force that animates the child animates you, animates the tree, animates the leaf, animates everything's connected. So the minute we release that, we surrender, we get rid of that we allow ourselves to express, we can then realize we're connected, and then you can see it from that point of view. How does that child feel? What is going on there? I am the child. What is going on in the child? I am the sibling. I am the father and the mother. When you start to do that, things change. things change in your mind.
Yeah.
And that's probably one of the things I would say is people to not be afraid to express the emotion, discern it, express it,
Yeah.
and then realize that you're interconnected with everything and you can see through the eyes of the child and not through your own eyes.
Yeah. Hard. That's one thing. Like our clients we have this thing where uh we do email check-ins and we say like get it out, send what you want to say to your ex, but send it to us, but you have to get it out, and we'll just put it aside for you. But don't be
Yeah,
like, I shouldn't feel this, I shouldn't say this. Don't edit in your head before you get it out. Like, get it out, but it's not going to that particular recipient.
here's the other thing that I do with people that I work with is if you're going through something like this, particularly emotional, and it may not be loss of a loved one, any form of grief or even in business, is use the power of your own reflection in the camera. Sit in front of the camera and let it talk to yourself and let it out.
Mm-hmm.
Then go back and watch it and then take notes.
Uh-huh.
Because as you do this, inside of you, you start to realize where your anger is. You start to see patterns. So sometimes I do, sit and journal and see if you're not a writer, journal on the camera. All right, keep it safe because you don't want people to see it, and it's just for you. But you're talking to yourself.
Yeah.
And you can give yourself an avatar. It could be you in the future. It could be this is my angry me. Let's label it. Maybe I'm going to label this person as another element of me, another avatar of me, and I'm just going to let it go. And then when you go back and watch it, you can like, okay, you can start to recognize expressions. You can start to recognize even your body language. You can start to recognize how you speak. You start to recognize these things as well. And that's so cathartic to do.
Yeah. I'm thinking visual journaling.
That's it,
That's what
visual
I'm.
journaling.
Mm-hmm.
I use it all the time. I teach people I work with to use it, and they get a bit nervous. Oh, I can't do that, Jock. I can't do that, and they're frightened because they've got this idea that being on camera is something really weird. But it's just you. Oh, here's the other thing: start yourself a journal podcast, not something that you put out there. Just get on and record audio. Journal on your podcast. I've done it. I walk around the lake and I walk and I thoughts and stuff, and I'll journal on my audio
Mm-hmm.
and I'll go back and listen to it, and I'm like, okay, I can see where maybe this could change, or I could see this. It doesn't. There's so many ways of expressing, so many ways of you learning to cope in in a way that makes you feel comfortable with yourself. Because here's the thing: most people are not comfortable with themselves,
Right.
and all of these cases that you work on, a lot of the problem is they don't know who they are, and
Well,
they're
that's true. I mean, especially the coming out of a relationship where they've lost themselves, they've lost their center. So
What is
that's
the
true.
first what is the first level of grief that they experience? People often don't recognize this. What do you think the first level of grief is?
Denial.
It's
No.
disconnection from yourself,
Mm.
right? Because the way that we experience it, we become disconnected. We don't know who we are. We don't know. Goes back to the same thing that was in if you're biblical in any way, man, know thyself. Jesus said, know thyself, right? There's so many different expressions of this. If we don't know who we are, how can we cope with life? How can we transform things? Get to know who you are, know yourself. And this is the first aspect of grief that people go through. They're disconnected from them. It's not just that they're disconnected from the situation or the sibling or the child. They've disconnected from themselves. So that distance that is created then is worse, right? So we've not only got disconnection, but now we've got distance.
I was at this event last night, this little party, and one of the questions that the facilitator was saying, how about we do this? Because it was like a holiday, I think it was called like good energy and good vibes. But he said, say something that you're grateful for this past year. And one woman stood up and she said, this is going to be a little controversial, but I'm grateful for myself. I really showed up for myself. I
Yep.
was confident. I did what I had to do and I got stuff done. And I'm really proud of myself. And I was like, that's awesome. And that sounds like that fits with what you're saying.
That's perfect. And here's the other thing: people don't understand what gratitude means. Even we've gone through Thanksgiving and things. People go around the table. I've seen it so many times. What are you grateful for? Oh, I'm grateful. I've got a nice car. I've got a nice house. I've got a job. I'm grateful for this. I'm thankful for this. That's not where the power is. And just a simple analogy, going back to the going into the story of the gratitude. Where does it all come from? To understand it, you need to go into that story, right? If you're sitting there with that Sumatra coffee in Starbucks, where did it come from?
Mm-hmm.
Who picked that bean? Do they have family? What was the weather like? What was the area like? Do we think that maybe that bean came from a war-torn place? Every energy is carried on. So we have to think when we really think about gratitude, we need to go into the story of the gratitude because that's how we really feel the power of gratitude. That's how we really start to understand it because we don't surface level it. We don't say I'm thankful for this because it means nothing. It's worth saying glibly.
Mm-hmm.
That woman saying I'm thankful for me, what does that tell me? It tells me that she's contemplated. She's transformed elements of her life. She's introspected, she's gone into introspection and she's come out with it. So she's really gone into her own narrative, her own story. And most people don't. See, most people are just like, I'm thankful for this, I'm thankful for that, and they think that's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's surface level, that's nothing.
Wow. All right. Well, Jock, I know we could go on for hours, but it's been almost one. How can people find you? I mean, this has been absolutely amazing.
Well, they can obviously connect with me here. In my channel here, I have a grief community as well. You can find details on my website, jockbrocas.com. Um, and you can message me. I always answer every message, never, often not quickly, because obviously I'm very busy doing different things. But through my website, you can email me, you can message me, or you can message me here on Instagram, where I'll get back to you as soon as I possibly can. And I'm always, if anybody's got any questions, they can ask me, and I'm happy to share whatever knowledge and wisdom that I have. I've got a new course that actually is a course that's coming out that I've never really done before, and I'm going into, and it's not ready yet, but I'm going into grief and all aspects of grief, and taking away the spiritual aspect of it and going into the strategic, the life, the real truth of it in all aspects of life, to look at it from a powerful point of view, a transformational point of view, rather than looking at it from a new age spiritual elements. Well, that's never been really challenged before.
Mm-hmm. Fascinating. By the way, you got a message, greetings from Poland. So people around the world are listening to you.
Excellent, thank you from Poland. I love Poland.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Jock. You're coming back. I can't remember the date, like
For sure.
soon. Yeah. And we're going
For
to
another
talk about
subject, yeah.
more amazing things in terms of how to remain safe in a hostile world. I think that's our
Yeah,
next topic. But
absolutely.
mind blowing. I'm thrilled. I'm so glad that we met and that we're going to have many more beautiful conversations together.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for being, and
All right.
everybody out there that's listening. I hope that you take something away from this and it starts your transformational journey. So thank you.
All right. Take care.
God bless. Bye bye.
Bye.